Rain starts falling outside your window right now. You barely notice it. You glance up, maybe close a window, and go back to what you were doing. It's just weather, but the real reason you feel nothing is far stranger than boredom. For almost all of human history, that same sound on the roof was not weather. It was a message, a mood swing from something enormous, unpredictable, and capable of ending your life in a single season. Somewhere between then and now, that fear became something else entirely. It became religion. Here is the strange part. Civilizations that never met, separated by oceans, mountains, and thousands of years, arrived at the exact same conclusion about rain. It came from something alive, something with intention, something that could be pleased or provoked or furious. The Mesopotamians told a story about a god named Enlil who grew so tired of humanity's noise that he sent a flood to erase it. The Hebrew Bible tells almost the same story, with a man named Noah instead of the Mesopotamian survivor Utnapishtim. In Hindu tradition, a figure named Manu is warned by a divine fish before the waters rise. Aboriginal Australian communities, isolated from all of these cultures by tens of thousands of years and an entire ocean, tell Dreamtime stories of ancestral beings who reshape the land through flood and storm. None of these people spoke to each other. None of them shared a religion, a language, or a continent. And yet they told the same story, again and again, independently across the entire inhabited world. Why would that happen? The anthropologist E.B. Tylor, one of the founders of the modern study of religion, argued that early belief systems began with animism, the idea that natural forces are not objects, but agents. Wind has a will, rivers have moods, storms have intentions. Tylor's theory was simple. When something is unpredictable and powerful, the human mind does not experience it as random. It experiences it as a decision made by someone. Rain does not just fall. Rain chooses to fall, or chooses not to. This is not primitive confusion. It's a coping mechanism, and a remarkably effective one. A universe governed by chaos offers you nothing to do. A universe governed by a god offers you a relationship. If the rain god is angry, you can find out why. You can apologize. You can perform a ritual. You can change the outcome. Uncertainty becomes something closer to negotiation, and a species that negotiates with its environment survives it better than a species that simply endures it. This is where ritual enters the picture, and it is worth pausing here because rituals are almost never discussed for what they actually were, not superstition for its own sake. Risk management. The Victorian scholar Sir James Frazer spent decades cataloguing rain-making ceremonies from cultures across the globe in his sprawling study of comparative religion, the Golden Bough. Dances performed to imitate the sound and movement of falling rain, offerings poured onto dry ground to demonstrate, symbolically, what was being asked for. Priests and shamans whose entire social function was to read the sky and act as an intermediary between the community and the storm. Frazer noticed a pattern across cultures that had never been in contact. The logic of the ritual was always the same. Show the universe what you want, and it might give it to you. Was any of this actually controlling the weather? No, but that misses the point entirely. A rain dance did not need to work meteorologically to work psychologically. It gave a frightened, powerless group of people something to do in the face of a threat they could not otherwise influence. It turned panic into procedure. And procedure, even symbolic procedure, calms a group down enough to keep functioning instead of collapsing into despair. There's also a second function almost nobody mentions. Rituals were rehearsals for cooperation. When an entire village performs a rain ceremony together, they are practicing something more useful than weather control. They are practicing acting as one unit under pressure. That skill, group cohesion under existential threat, is worth more to a community's long-term survival than any amount of actual rainfall. But what happened when the rain god said no? This is where the story gets darker, and where you start to see how deeply this belief system was wired into the survival of entire civilizations, not just their spiritual lives. The historian Brian Fagan, who has spent much of his career studying the relationship between climate and the rise and fall of ancient societies, has argued that prolonged drought played a direct role in the collapse of multiple early civilizations. The Akkadian Empire, one of the first empires in human history, appears in the archaeological and climate record to have crumbled during a sudden, sustained dry period, roughly 4,000 years ago. Entire regions were depopulated, cities were abandoned, and the people living through it did not experience this as a shift in atmospheric pressure systems. They experienced it as divine abandonment. Think about what that actually means, psychologically, for the people living through it. If rain is a God's decision, then the absence of rain is not bad luck. It's punishment, it's rejection. Entire societies built elaborate theological explanations for their own suffering, because the alternative, that the universe was simply indifferent to them, was somehow harder to accept than the idea that they were being deliberately punished by something that at least knew they existed. A cruel God who notices you is psychologically easier to live with than a universe that doesn't. This pattern repeats constantly throughout history. Societal stress, drought, famine, and flood are followed by intensified religious ritual, sometimes including human sacrifice. Some archaeologists studying the ancient Andes have linked the timing of a wave of ceremonial killings to a period of extreme El Niño-driven flooding, interpreting it as an escalation, a desperate attempt to offer the gods something valuable enough to end the crisis. When ordinary rituals stopped working, communities didn't abandon the belief system. They intensified it. The god wasn't wrong. The offering must not have been enough yet. There's something worth sitting with here. This isn't a story about ancient people being irrational. It's a story about what any mind does when it's handed an unsolvable problem with catastrophic stakes. You look for a pattern. You look for a cause. You look for something you can influence, even slightly, because the alternative, total helplessness, is almost unbearable to hold for very long. And that brings the story back to you, standing at your window, watching rain that means nothing to you emotionally. You don't perform a ritual when it rains. You don't wonder what you did to deserve it. But watch how you talk about weather the next time a serious storm approaches your area. A hurricane is described as angry. A heat wave is described as brutal or merciless, as if it has chosen to be cruel. News coverage of a wildfire often describes it as if it's hunting a town. This isn't an accident of language. It's the same cognitive machinery Tylor identified over a century ago, still running quietly underneath a species that otherwise believes it has outgrown it. You know, intellectually, that a storm has no intention, and some part of your mind still narrates it, like it does. Maybe that's the real inheritance here. Not the flood myths themselves, most of which you've never read. Not the rain dances, which no one in your daily life performs anymore. What survived is the underlying instinct that built them in the first place, the refusal to sit inside chaos without a story to explain it. Every culture that ever looked up at an unpredictable sky and decided something was in charge of it was doing the same thing you still do, quietly, automatically, every time you check a weather app before deciding whether the day ahead is going to go well or badly. Rain is falling outside your window right now. This time, you notice.